January 15th, 1919. A strange, sweet smell hangs in the freezing winter air of Boston's North End. Suddenly, a sound like a machine gun rips through the streets. A 50-foot wall of dark, boiling liquid is about to swallow the neighborhood whole. The North End of Boston was a densely populated, vibrant community, heavily settled by Italian immigrants. Towering over their homes and the local firehouse on Commercial Street was a colossal, 50-foot-tall steel storage tank. Built in 1915 by the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, or USIA, it held up to 2.3 million gallons of molasses. But this wasn't just for baking. The molasses was fermented and distilled into industrial alcohol, a critical component in manufacturing munitions for the First World War. When the war ended, the focus shifted to producing rum to beat the impending prohibition laws. The tank was a rush job, constructed with minimal oversight and glaring engineering flaws. For years, locals noticed the massive structure groaning under the immense weight of the syrup. It leaked so badly that neighborhood children would run to the base with cups to collect the sweet drippings. The company's solution to the constant alarming leaks wasn't to reinforce the steel or empty the tank. Instead, they simply painted it brown to hide the seeping molasses. It was a ticking time bomb of gross negligence, sitting right in the middle of a crowded residential district. On that fateful January morning, the tank was filled to the absolute brim. The temperature had risen rapidly over the past few days, causing the liquid inside to ferment and expand. The pressure against the brittle steel walls was building to a catastrophic breaking point. At approximately 12:30 p.m., the unthinkable happened. With a deafening roar that witnesses later described as a thunderclap mixed with the tearing of metal, the massive steel tank burst open. 2.3 million gallons of thick, dark molasses erupted into the streets. But this wasn't a slow, sticky ooze. It was a terrifying 25-foot-high tsunami, traveling at an estimated 35 miles per hour. The sheer force of the wave was apocalyptic, unleashing a kinetic energy equivalent to a small earthquake. It snapped the steel girders of the adjacent elevated railway like twigs, nearly throwing a passing passenger train off the tracks to the streets below. It flattened buildings, crushing homes and businesses in an instant. Engine 31, the local firehouse, was ripped from its foundation and swept away with the firefighters still trapped inside. Men, women, and horses were caught in the suffocating, viscous tide. The more they struggled, the deeper they sank into the freezing, rapidly hardening sludge. The air was filled with the sounds of collapsing timber, screaming horses, and terrified residents trapped beneath the splintered wreckage. As the brown tidal wave swallowed Commercial Street, the entire North End was plunged into a sticky, suffocating darkness. But the true nightmare for the survivors was only just beginning. The immediate aftermath resembled a war zone. The molasses had quickly cooled in the winter air, transforming from a fast-moving fluid into a dense, inescapable trap. Rescue efforts began almost immediately, led by sailors from the nearby lightship Nantucket, followed by local police, Red Cross workers, and Army personnel. Wading through waist-deep, freezing syrup was nearly impossible. Rescuers had to cut through the hardened molasses with axes and saws just to reach the victims. They worked tirelessly through the night, guided by the eerie glow of gas lamps, listening for the faint cries of those buried under the collapsed buildings. The devastation was staggering. 21 people lost their lives, ranging from a 10-year-old boy collecting firewood to elderly residents crushed in their homes. Another 150 were severely injured. The cleanup alone took weeks. Firefighters used salt water from the harbor to wash away the stubborn residue, while the harbor itself turned a murky brown until summer. The United States Industrial Alcohol Company immediately went on the defensive. They claimed the tank had been blown up by anarchists, pointing to recent bombings across the country as proof. But the grieving citizens of Boston weren't buying the sabotage story, and they were preparing to fight back. The disaster sparked one of the most exhaustive legal battles in American history. Over 100 lawsuits were filed against USIA, eventually consolidated into a massive class action lawsuit. The company hired top-tier lawyers, insisting that Italian anarchists had planted a bomb, but the plaintiff's legal team dug into the tank's history, uncovering a trail of shocking negligence. They found the man who oversaw the tank's construction, Arthur Gell. He wasn't an engineer, he was an accountant. I didn't think it was necessary to consult an engineer. We just needed the tank built quickly to meet production demands. Ivatar. Gell had completely skipped basic safety tests. When the tank was finished, he only tested it by running a few inches of water into the bottom, ignoring the immense pressure a full tank of molasses would create. Workers at the plant testified about the terrifying sounds the tank made. Every time they filled it, you could hear it groaning. The rivets would pop and shoot out like bullets. We were terrified. The court appointed a special auditor, Colonel Hugh Ogden, to hear the massive amount of evidence. Over 3 years, he listened to 3,000 witnesses and reviewed thousands of documents. Metallurgical experts were brought in, a rarity for the time, to examine the shattered steel. A rarity, for the steel was too thin. It was only half as thick as it needed to be to hold that much weight. It was doomed to fail. If Avatar. The evidence of corporate greed was overwhelming. USIA had ignored every warning sign, prioritizing profits over human lives. They told us to paint it brown so no one would see the leaks. They knew it was breaking, and they did nothing. The auditor's final report was about to set a legal precedent that would change the nation. In April 1925, Colonel Ogden delivered his highly anticipated verdict. He completely rejected the anarchist bombing theory, calling it a desperate fabrication. USIA was found entirely at fault due to structural failure, poor planning, and gross negligence. The company was ordered to pay $300,000 in damages to the victims and their families, an amount equivalent to roughly $5 million today. It was a landmark legal victory. For the first time in American history, a powerful corporation was held financially accountable for the safety of its structures. The Great Molasses Flood triggered sweeping legislative changes across the country. Boston and other major cities immediately rewrote their building codes. Independent engineers and architects were now required to sign off on blueprints, and municipal building inspectors were mandated to verify safety standards before any large industrial structure could be utilized. The disaster effectively birthed the modern era of engineering ethics and municipal building regulations. The physical scars of the flood eventually faded from the North End, replaced by parks and modern streets. But for decades, locals swore that on hot summer days, the sweet, sickly scent of molasses still seeped up from the cobblestones, a tragic reminder of the day corporate greed drowned a neighborhood. The Boston Molasses Flood changed building laws forever, but it wasn't the last time a massive industrial oversight led to an unimaginable catastrophe. What happens when a city's entire water supply becomes a ticking time bomb waiting to burst? The answer is terrifying.